Welcome to the Filmlinks podcast,
a bi-weekly podcast where we analyze all that goes into effective filmmaking.
I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Alex.
And this is episode 82, Mighty Preposterous Monty Python.
Yes, indeed. It's going to be a fun one. This was a very fun episode to do research on and to do prep for, obviously, because this is such a delightful group of comedians and artists and performers to track and to study and just to watch all of their stuff. It gave me an excuse to finally go watch all of their live shows, which I've been looking for a while. So that was quite enjoyable.
Yeah. And for anyone interested, like, most of their stuff is on Netflix right now. So if you have Netflix, you have access to pretty much virtually everything that they've ever recorded. I think The Meaning of Life is not on there, but almost everything else is.
Yeah, and it's a pretty cheap rental, unlike Amazon or iTunes if it's not. Yeah. So it's all there. It's all available. I think they even have like a retrospective where like different celebrities like track what their favorite clips of Monty Python were. Monty Python has a YouTube channel where they've posted all of their best skits. All of it's out there, ready to be enjoyed.
I think John Cleese has his own YouTube channel right now.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. That sounds like something he'd do. But speaking of John Cleese, let's talk about the group itself. What is a Monty? What is a Python? What is a Monty Python? Well, the main members of the group, there are 6 of them, 5 of which are British, 1 of which is American.
2 of which are Terry.
2 of which are Terry. John Cleese, Graham Chapman, and Eric Idle all went to Cambridge University, where they all kind of participated in some of the same comedy circles, although Cleese and Chapman were definitely closer as writing partners than Idle. Terry Jones and Michael Palin both went to Oxford, where they were all in some of the same comedy circles. So you can see kind of like the 1960s college comedy, irreverent, upending the system, baby boomer type mentality. Comes into play in a large part in this group. And then, of course, Terry Gilliam, the American, came over to England at some point. I actually didn't realize he was
American.
Yeah. He came over at some point, I think, as an illustrator. He actually is really, really good at illustration and animation. He doesn't need to use the cutouts that he used for Monty Python, but we'll get into why that was later on.
Yeah.
But he came over and they all worked across a variety of shows. The Footlights was a performing show at Cambridge that ended up developing its own live show that went on to like perform in Broadway, and John Cleese ended up through that on Broadway in American productions for a while. Same with Graham Chapman, traveling, working in some of these live stage shows. Then they all kind of started meeting up back in England to work on stuff like This Is Now the 1948 Show and The Frost Report and other comedic shows of like the mid to late 1960s, where they were all mostly writers. The biggest performer among them was really John Cleese. He was the most actor of them. He acted on Broadway. He acted in movies. He will tell you repeatedly in his autobiography that he'd rather be a writer than an actor, but he is probably the most well-rehearsed actor out of a lot of them. And of course, eventually they all became so they had the reputation that they ended up earning the right to have their own show, and John Cleese and some of the others start to pull together and be like, hey, what if we all work together? And so they came together to become Monty Python.
Yeah, I kind of want to talk about the name a little bit, because when they were approaching the BBC to come up with a name, they were literally just kind of almost word associating, just like throwing the most ridiculous words together that they could. And so some of the stuff that they tried to make the show be called are like owl stretching time, the toad elevating moment, a horse, a spoon, and a bucket, Vaseline review, and bun, whacket, buzzard, stubble, and boot. And eventually the studio was like, all right, let's just do like flying circus. It's fun. It kind of gets the sense of it, and then they kind of compromise by adding the words Monty Python, which mean nothing. They're just silly words that they put in front of it, so then it becomes Monty Python's Flying Circus.
Yeah, somebody came up with Monty. I think they came up with Monty based off of a famous British general from World War II. Although that's just,
it sounds like a super British word.
That's just what got them to think of the name. That's not why they picked the name.
Right.
It's just that's how they thought of it, and then somebody thought of Python, and boom, you have Monty Python's Flying Circus. And yeah, Flying Circus was mandated basically by the studio.
Right.
Which is funny because John Cleese actually, in one of his traveling shows that he was involved in, him and Graham Chapman, was called, I don't remember the first part, but it had circus in the name. And so John Cleese always mentions that he gets asked a lot whether or not the two are related, whether or not he named Monty Python's Flying Circus off of this earlier circus that they were involved in. And the answer to that is no. It's all a little random. Is definitely a theme held in the Monty Python skits.
Right. It's very appropriate.
Yeah. But anyway, so we have these 6 guys together. They kind of bring their own different strengths to the table. John Cleese is definitely very good at playing authority figures. He's, probably the best actor of the bunch in terms of, how much he's worked on it. And he's always had a pretty big emphasis when it comes to writing on structure. And making sure the skits flow well and work within themselves and so on. Graham Chapman, Cleese's writing partner, was very good at playing like the straight man on screen in terms of like being
ironically.
As they mentioned in the book repeatedly, he is was. He passed away from cancer of the throat, I think. In fact, the most recent live show of the Pythons is Monty Python Live, in parentheses, mostly. But he also was the homosexual member of the group, and they all include that story of his coming out party in all of their autobiographies. And they all have a slightly different take on it, which is amusing. There's like a Rashomon effect that happens when you go through all of their autobiographies, that you interpret all the moments differently. But anyway, yes, Chapman was very good at playing the straight man on screen, which is the character who kind of is the most serious, the one who's like, this is crazy, what's going on? And you can see that when he plays like King Arthur or Brian and Life of Brian. And of course, him and
generals. Yeah,
him and Cleese were very, very good friends, and they did a lot of writing together from college up through to Chapman's untimely passing. They were very, very good friends. They kind of formed one of the 2 core writing teams of the group. Then you have Eric Idle, who is kind of like the songwriter of the group. He's the guy who sings Always Look on the Bright Side of Life. And he was also definitely, from his autobiography, the most like into the high-flying celebrity group of the Monty Pythons. And he, in fact, would come to like host SNL like 4 times during the 70s. Then you have Terry Jones. He was the guy who cranked a lot of the craziest, most out of left field stuff into the scripts. He eventually became a director through the Monty Python movies first, and then some of his own his own stuff. He would butt heads a lot with Cleese, but they didn't hate each other like it was often reported in the media. Then you have Michael Palin, who's like the nice one of the group, not to use like boy band labels, but you definitely get that vibe going through the autobiographies. And he was in a writing team with Jones. They both went to Oxford together. They worked very well together. And again, Eric Idle reached out to him in the 70s and got him onto SNL too, where he actually ended up hosting it 4 times, and one of the times he had a cat poop on him during live TV, so that's fun. And then
there were like several confined space skits after that sounded like terrible.
That was it was a hilarious but uncomfortable story to get through in his book. And then, of course, you have Terry Gilliam, who's become pretty famous as a director in his own right. And he was the animator of the squad, often working on his own. In fact, they typically, during Flying Circus, they wouldn't have time to really talk to him about what his skits were going to be. So they would just break down the structure of what the episode would look like and be like, we need animation here, here, and here to get us from here to here, here to here, here to here. And Gilliam would just go do it. And he butts heads a lot with Cleese, including in Cleese's autobiography, which is quite entertaining. But again, I don't think they actually hate each other. They just argue. And the fact that all of these guys can get together and still have creative differences, but work through those creative differences to polish their product to the best it can be, is probably one of the things that makes this so remarkable, and makes their stuff so good. But we're not going to talk about the show today more than we just did. We're going to talk about the movies, which are, Jonathan.
Yeah, so kicking off with the 3 kind of like film versions that are less skit compilations and more films, but that line gets a little blurred in the last one. But the first one is Monty Python and the Holy Grail from 1972, directed by Terry Gilliam and Terry Jones, the one that most Americans will know and love and probably be able to quote along with us. And then second is Life of Brian from 1979, directed by Terry Jones, probably the most controversial of the lot. And the third is The Meaning of Life from 1983, directed again by Terry Gilliam and Terry Jones, the most absolutely ridiculous of the lot.
Yeah, no, you're right. They have 3 other things you can call movies, 2 of which are live shows. The other one is And Now for Something Completely Different, which is mostly just a collection of their best skits from the show, stitched together into a movie format for redistribution. But we're going to be focusing mostly on the narrative, or in the idea of The Meaning of Life, loosely narrative.
Yeah. That'd be very interesting.
Kind of narrative. I mean, it's interesting. Eric Idle would often say after they made The Meaning of Life that they should have had a more structured idea to it, and he had some thoughts on it. But they didn't. So we are going to just enjoy it for what it is and study it for what it is today. But our first one, of course, is Monty Python and the Holy Grail from 1972. Jason, explain to us the plot, if you can, of that movie.
Monty Python and the Holy Grail from 1975. The year is 932 AD, and His Royal Highness King Arthur, along with his squire, the coconut-clapping Patsy, are on a quest for knights to join the Round Table. After some misunderstandings about a sparrow and witchery, he recruits Sir Bedivere the Wise, Sir Lancelot the Brave, Sir Robin the not quite so brave as Sir Lancelot, Sir Galahad the Pure, and Sir not appearing in this film. They first decide to go to Camelot, but since tis a silly place, they turn away and God appears to them in Terry Gilliam animated form, sending them on a quest to find the Holy Grail. And so they're off, facing down such legendary comic scenes as the Frenchman and the Cow, the Knights Who Say Knee, the Three-Headed Giant, Castle Anthrax, and the Wedding at the Swamp Castle. Our heroes face many a danger and many a comedic circumstance, all on their quest for the one and only Holy Grail.
So I was thinking that since these are just so many jokes packed into each of these films, we just kind of start off with favorite bits and stuff like that. And so Monty Python is a little hard because everybody knows all of the bits. And of course, the Black Knight is great and all that. I kind of like watching it again this time. For some reason, Scene 24 struck me just like as a thing called Scene 24, which is like this. It's the one moment where they're talking to the crazy guy in the cave and trying to figure out where the Grail is, and he just keeps laughing and then disappears without really telling them anything. He like gives them some cryptic information and then disappears, and then they bring it up again later and they're like, as we showed you in Scene 24. I don't know, I just thought that was kind of funny, like as a meta element, making Scene 24 a thing.
Yeah. No, I've always really enjoyed the bridge scene. Where everybody has to answer the questions and try to get across. It's
a great twist.
One, it's hilarious. 2, it's twisty and well written, and kind of like the whole concept is playing with like the like this meta idea of what we expect answers to be in a movie, and what they actually are. And I'm almost 100% sure that's unintentional. I don't think these guys were thinking at all about making a meta commentary on a film. I mean, they were trying to like parody the idea of like this medieval movies and fantasy movies for sure, but I don't think they were intentionally poking fun at it that directly. And then of course there's
in some of the later films they do get very specific on like parodying other films, but this one is mostly just kind of like the idea of medieval stories.
And listening to the story of how this production went down, it's very clear that it feels like they were lucky to get through it alive. So but yeah, I of course especially love the callback to the Sparrow.
That setup and payoff is great.
Yeah. That's one of those things that they teach you about in screenwriting classes. Like, you need to plant whatever like ultimate move or thing that's going to get brought up by the hero that's going to save them at the end of the movie. It needs to be planted like within like the first 5 minutes of the movie or something ridiculous like that. It happens a lot more than you'd think. Yeah. But in this one, they do that, which is great. The Sparrow callback happens within the Sparrow setup happens within the first 5 minutes of the movie. It's one of the first bits. And it comes back in a moment of dire need for the hero, which is like supreme screenwriting. But of course, none of these guys have formal screenwriting training or dramatic screenwriting training. Before this, I think Chapman and Cleese had written some screenplays for David Frost or for some other people who they were connected with in the industry, but none which they produced themselves. And they certainly did not have dramatic screenplay training. So it's just remarkable that these guys who have an incredible sense of story ended up doing this thing that gets drilled into your head repeatedly when you go to the classes. But I think out of I don't know how correct that kind of setup and payoff it is. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that the reason that it works so well here and doesn't feel like trite or tropey is because the style of the film is so irrational and just all over the place that you don't expect that to happen. You expect like each bit to be self-contained in its own scene. And so when something like so random, because the first, like that being the first bit is them having this completely insane conversation about sparrows carrying coconuts. You expect that to just be like, oh, that was funny. That makes no sense. They wouldn't have been talking about that in the Middle Ages. And then for that to come back is just even more ridiculous, and you enjoy it because you remember like, oh yeah, I remember that scene didn't make sense, but now it actually kind of had to be there. And they do that with a lot of the jokes in this, like the counting jokes of where King Arthur always counts 1, 2, 5, and the I'm not dead yet jokes and stuff like that they set up throughout, and then they don't usually have as consequential an outcome as the swallow bit, but they're still kind of peppered throughout there, and so you can kind of pick up on it, and it makes it feel very cohesive.
Yeah. And it turns out the things that make for good comedy are weirdly enough the things that make for good drama. Just I think the matter of the tone and how serious it is. And Python's Python's very good at being very serious about being very funny. Like, and I think we've talked about this before on one of the comedy episodes, but you have to be, the characters can't like nod and wink at the audience in something this ridiculous. They have to wholeheartedly believe in what they're doing for it to work. Like if the Black Knight didn't fully believe that he wasn't hurt, like that bit wouldn't work.
Yeah.
The thing that makes it funny is how serious he is. The character is funny, not necessarily the joke that he's telling.
But the thing is that they actually do nod and wink at the audience, but you have to understand that they're breaking character when they do that. So, for example, in the Castle of Anthrax, when the woman goes, do you think this scene should have been cut? Someone thought that it was a little bit too long or whatever. But we realized that that's not her character. When she's in character, she's believing whatever she's saying.
Oh, yeah.
And then she breaks character, and we love it because we understand that disconnect.
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of like meta jokes and fourth wall breaks built into Python, especially this movie. And I think this movie does a really good job of it. We've often talked about like the ebb and flow of films, right? Well, this film has like a different kind of ebb and flow, like this meta ebb and flow of how engrossed you are in the story versus how removed you get from it. And the Pythons did a very good job of managing that level throughout the movie. And again, I think maybe it was a little unintentional, but it happened, and it's great because you start getting into the story, and then like a meta joke comes along to keep it from getting too serious, and it keeps doing that throughout the movie. And you kind of have to do that throughout the movie because if you get too engrossed into the story, then their ending doesn't work at all. For the ending to work, you have to be functioning on both the engrossed, this is the King Arthur story, and the meta, this is a parody of the King Arthur story, because otherwise you're just frustrated by the ending. But if you're enjoying the meta level as well, you laugh at how it ends, which I don't think we're going to mention right now, just because we don't want to spoil. But suffice to say, it involves some kind of meta ridiculous nonsense.
Yeah.
And their entire extra budget for the movie.
Yeah. Which this is not a high budget movie, and you could tell most of it's all shot on location in Scotland. So since so many of their scenes take place outside, first of all, it was apparently miserable to shoot, but second of all, they don't have to do a lot of set dressing because Scotland just is rainy and muggy and foggy and gross, and so they just shot it as is.
Way to crap on Scotland there.
I just watched a John Cleese interview with Seth Meyers, and he literally was saying that like it was just terrible. Scotland has like 2 weeks of good weather throughout the year, and they were not shooting during those.
I mean, it's gonna be misty, man. It's gonna be Maury.
So they didn't have to do a lot of like set decoration. They had one castle that they could shoot at, so all of the castle shots are in one castle, and but everything else was just cheap props and stuff from the show. I think
didn't they? I think. The Terrys had scouted out a bunch of castles throughout Scotland to use, and then like the day before they were going to start shooting, the Scottish government got in touch with them and was like, this script is too silly, and so they were only allowed to use like one castle, and so they just shot it from a billion different angles to make it look like the castle that we see in the film, which is really impressive.
And they make a meta joke about that where they see the castle off at a distance at some point, and one of the pages goes, they're like, "Oh, look, the castle! It's right there." And like, well, it's just a model or something like that.
Yeah.
Just
you're right.
Playing on the scale.
And yeah, you're also right that this was very low budget filmmaking, and so they were kind of flying by the seat of their pants here, trying to figure it out. And obviously, they couldn't afford horses. Or the film union or film organization mandated safety and training that comes along with using animals on set, and they would all have to learn how to ride horses. And once you start getting into it, the whole thing is very expensive to make work. But they could afford some coconuts, and they thought it might be funny, and they were very worried about whether or not it would be funny, and they had to do it because of money things, and then they did it, and it ends up being one of the best parts of the movie. And to this day, they still complain that it's really hard to sign a coconut, even though they've been asked to autograph many a coconut. And of course, this it didn't start in this movie. It became a signature of Monty Python by this movie, but it started in The Flying Circus, where Gilliam did his animation by using this cutout animation style, where he would cut out pictures from magazines, from art pieces. I think the foot, like the famous Monty Python foot. Stay tuned for our social media for info on that. Is actually from like a famous painting and Gilliam like found a reprint of it or something and cut it out and used that. And he did that not because he couldn't draw. He's a very good illustrator. He did that because he didn't have the money to afford an animation team to do it in the time that he had to do it for a week-to-week basis. So he started doing it this way, and it became a signature of the show. I mean, who doesn't love the Monty Python style of cut-out, hodgepodge, remix animation?
Yeah, scrapbooky looking.
That just goes all over the place. And definitely, like, if you look at the Monty Python animation and then you look at, like, Gilliam's Imagination trilogy, obviously there's going to be a big connect because they're done by the same person, but the weird left turns in visual cues that they take are very, very similar, and they all start here. And of course, you know, sometimes you make a crazy movie and you get stuck into a corner, or you make a really cool story and get stuck into a corner, lost. But you know, the Monty Python had fun with it in this movie because they do it. They write themselves into a corner with the animated chase scene, and Gilliam didn't know how to end it, and they didn't have the time or the luxury to figure it out. So they did it in a really clever little twist, and they just killed the animator.
Yeah, and they do that in at least Meaning of Life does it several times and stuff like that. But I mean, that was a hallmark of the show too. Is like if they just couldn't find a way to end the skit, you know, just drop a 1-ton weight on somebody or hit them with a rubber chicken or something, just to end the skit once it stops being as funny as it can be.
Yeah,
and that's kind of how the film ends in itself.
Yeah. There's no punchline. The Monty Python credo is no punchline. And
they just end it.
There is no punchline. It just ends, and it's funny. And I like that kind of humor that isn't super based on just telling jokes. I mean, I like jokes a lot, but I like this kind of clever, dry wit humor that's based on personality and based on situations and just enjoying the humor of a moment, and then it ends. I think that's a little more realistic to the funny things that you see on a day-to-day basis in your life. And it's certainly kind of introduced, and we have to credit Monty Python for this, introducing this, what we call a British sense of humor to America.
Absolutely. And I kind of want to talk about the structure of the film a little bit, because in all three of these, it's a little bit different. So we've got 6 writers, because all of the Pythons are writing sketches, some of them in pairs, some of them individually, and then they're kind of pulling them all together into this one theme, which is kind of the Knights of the Round Table type of a thing. And so, because all 3 of these films are essentially sketch-based, but they feel like that to different levels depending on like the way that they're held together. So in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, it's nice because they have several characters. You have several different knights that go off and have their own adventures. So a writer can, you know, focus on that one character that can be doing his own thing and having his own weird adventure, and then they still all come back together into this one story. And Life of Brian has that even more because there's only one main focal character, and then Meaning of Life doesn't have that. But I think Monty Python and the Holy Grail is a really good example of being able to kind of split up those tasks and still have it feel cohesive just by the nature of it being a little bit more of an ensemble piece with a solid through line. Yeah,
no, it's kind of nice to see the Monty Python kind of like turn their attention to a structured narrative, because the looking at the structure of this compared to the structure of the Flying Circus just goes wherever the heck it wants to go. With no heed to a continual through line. I mean, it makes for
and now for something completely different.
Exactly, and it makes for incredibly clever and funny and hilarious segues. But the thing that always sticks with you, and you know, I think the reason we become story makers or storytellers / filmmakers, is story, and stories are what stick with you. You remember the moments very, very well. You remember the individual skits, and you enjoy seeing them connected together, but you don't remember them or cherish them in the same way that you do a connected story. And I think one of the most powerful things Monty Python and the Holy Grail did for fans of Monty Python and for Monty Python itself at the time, and getting it into people's brains and getting it into people's orbits of, view, people paying attention to it for the first time in America and Canada and places beyond, is giving them a story that they can remember and talk about besides just a stretch. It's easier for somebody who isn't a trained comedian to describe this ridiculous story about the Knights of the Round Table and they're all kind of idiots, but it's hilarious and they run around with coconuts, rather than them trying to just reenact the sketch or an individual sketch, because the sketch revolves around not only the skilled writing, but the actors being good. And if I'm trying to play out like the dead parrot sketch to somebody, like, it's going to be hilarious to me, but it's not going to be very funny to the other person. They'd have to see it to understand.
And it's also like, if you sit them down to watch that episode to show them the dead parrot sketch, you've got to go through like a bunch of other stuff. And aside from like describing every single one of the sketches separately, it's just a little different. But this being all kind of held together, if you're into it for something funny about knights being ridiculous, then you can sit through the whole thing and it all will feed that.
Yeah. And going off of this, they worked with a familiar story. Everybody knows.
Yeah.
It's not like they did a fantasy story, but they did whatever. They worked off of a familiar story. So everybody knows what this is supposed to be, and they know like it's supposed to be grand and epic and fantastical and heroic, and then it ends up not being any of those things. And that is the humor. It's so people start with something relatable and familiar, and then they parody it, twist it, and make it funny.
Yeah, like kind of epitomized in the Tale of Sir Robin, whenever his herald is like, he wasn't afraid to get his eyes gouged out or his bowels removed or his head chopped off, and he's just like, wait, what's gonna happen to me? And it's just kind of the complete opposite of what you expect from those old heroic tales.
Yeah, and see, I mean, we're even doing it right now, Jonathan. We're re-experiencing the story, and you end up quoting parts of it, and the parts sound hilarious, and then it spreads. Kind of like a virus, putting a little something in somebody's brain until they have to find out what Monty Python is all about. I mean, I learned about Monty Python in like middle school, and I felt like I learned about it way too late.
See, I had never even seen Holy Grail until high school, but I knew all the lines before I ever watched the movie, just because it's so pervasive, and I had heard everybody quote every scene before I'd actually seen the movie. So at that point I was like, oh yeah, I already know this movie and I haven't even seen it yet. But that's kind of what this kind of quotable movie that comes in little chunks can do. And I also think that we can't move off of this film without talking about the titles, because the opening credits are just amazing. It starts off like pretty normal, your director and like your head things, and then it starts with the Swedish subtitles that don't make sense at first, and you're like, oh wait, why do we have like Swedish subtitles on here? And then they start like actually being English words, like, oh, there's a nice cottage in the Swedish countryside or whatever. And it just like goes off from there, and then whoever made those titles was sacked, and then the new titles start, and then the llamas start showing up in the credits, and then those title makers were sacked, and then the epilepsy happens. Where they have the red and yellow flashing lights.
I don't think they could get away with that these days.
Oh no, not without without some kind of warning. Like even Incredibles 2 had a strobe light warning ahead of the film. And that's like the first thing that happens too. There's no warning.
Yeah, no, it just dives into like this crazy zaniness that's perfect for people who are already fans of Monty Python, and probably one of the best introductions possible to their style of humor for people who weren't familiar with Monty Python at the time.
Yeah, messing with the opening credits is a great way to show, like, we're here to break all the rules. This is not what you normally expect going into a movie. Even normal comedy movies follow some kind of filmmaking rules, and we are not bound to those. That's what you say when you start throwing llamas and ridiculous stuff into the opening titles before the film even starts.
Yeah, and they all talk about in their books, of course, that the comedy that they were used to when they were growing up was you weren't really allowed to make fun of. And I guess it wasn't necessarily that you weren't allowed of. It wasn't really convention that you made fun of authority figures, or at least in the circles that these guys floated in. That wasn't apropos. That wasn't allowed. Professional comedians didn't take shots at the prime minister or something like that. And of course, nowadays we're all used to that. And historically, too, that was a very prevalent thing. It was very common for leaders to get made fun of quite a bit. But, these guys see it and they kind of are part of this big cultural shift in the 60s to an irreverence for authority and making fun of things that are too serious or too strict or too uptight. And they take aim at all of that, starting from the opening credits and going forward all the way through. Yeah.
And we definitely see that. I feel like these three films kind of build on that, like, irreverence and, just taking shots at anything that anyone holds precious. That kind of gets expounded on in each of these next two films that we're about to talk about. But one at least fun fact that we should talk about here, because it's also going to kind of play in throughout their career, like, they always had somewhat of a limited budget and stuff like that. And so obviously this was very small budget because this is the first time that they're making a film that's kind of cohesive as a film. And so some of the funding for this film came from the band Led Zeppelin, who apparently were huge Monty Python fans. And it's funny reading the autobiographies and just like seeing them kind of finally meeting a bunch of their heroes from growing up who are now like watching Monty Python and falling in love with their stuff. And so there's kind of this mutual admiration as they meet a lot of these celebrities, and specifically one who played a big part in getting our next film created.
Yeah. It's interesting. They get involved in all of all of the celebrities who contributed to the countercultural movement of the 60s ended up being big fans of Monty Python. And then Monty Python also becomes like an extension of the countercultural movement, although it kind of fizzled out in the 70s a bit. But yes, you were talking specifically about one George Harrison who helped fund Life of Brian, which we are now going to talk about. Jason, take it away.
Monty Python's The Life of Brian from 1979. Brian was born in the stable next to the one where Jesus is born. He grows up to be an idealistic young man opposed to the Roman occupation of Judea. While attempting the Sermon on the Mount, he falls for a young rebel named Judith, which compels him to join the People's Front of Judea, who spend more time bickering than actually rebelling. Through a series of circumstances, he gathers a following of people convinced he's the Messiah, inspiring a movement of people devoted to him and his sandal. He now finds himself more at odds with the Romans, hounded by his supposed followers, harangued by his mother, and even harassed by an alien. All this while he tries to pursue his love interest, Judith. As Brian finds himself in increasingly hopeless situations, and eventually at the mercy of Pontius Pilate and Bigus Dickus, he is pushed farther and farther down the path of being a messiah. Trying to look on the bright side, Brian does his best to survive this, the life of Brian.
All right, Alex, do you have like a favorite bit from this movie, or like one that really stuck out to you?
It's a little inappropriate, but going back to
well, the whole movie is
is very inappropriate in a lot of ways. That's what makes it so funny. But I think I watched this in late middle school, early high school. I'm not sure. This is one of those movies that was on my big list of movies that I made when I decided in middle school I wanted to make movies for the rest of my life. And I had no idea what it was about. I didn't realize that it was a Monty Python movie. I just looked up that it was on my family's dial-up modem. I looked up that it was one of the best comedy movies ever made. So I found it and I watched it, and I was obviously I was completely shocked the entire time through. But I think my two favorite bits are, one, the graffiti scene. I thought that was completely ridiculous because I
was going to say that too.
I mean, not knowing who the Pythons were or what they did, the experience of going through that scene is just completely not what you expect at all. And it does a nice double turn where it goes from, oh, you expect they're going to punish him. Oh no, they're going to force him to write it out a billion times.
And it almost turns into like a like a schoolboy kind of skit, but just like the whole situation, like it's so flipped on its head like three different ways that it's so well built of a bit.
And then of course at the end there's the double punch because the first guards leave and then the next guards come up, and you've gone through this whole sketch and you think they're, I don't know, maybe going to comment on his Latin or something like that. But no, they're just going to act normally and punish him. And at that point, acting normally is so out of the norm in the scene that it is funny once again to act normally, which is great. It was a good introduction to what Monty Python was all about. And of course, the breaking in scene where the Judeans People's Front and the People's Front of Judea, one, fight each other and kill each other. Is hilarious. And two, the section where
Judean People's Front
where they break through the floor and the position of like the mural based on where they break through the floor was hilarious. I mean, like 13-year-old me did not understand what was going on the screen when he saw that. He didn't think that kind of stuff was in movies, and he was rolling on the floor laughing. So those are some moments that always stick out to me in this movie.
Yeah, I love all the bits with the Judean People's Front. Like they're bickering against each other. They're like banter. They're like man or woman, and then they lose their train of thought because they're trying so hard to be politically correct. It was just hilarious, and I think that's one of the things. Like this film, and we'll probably talk about this, is like very controversial because it does take a lot of shots at religion, and but in general, it takes a lot of shots at authority in general, and like wherever that's coming from, and so it takes a lot of shots at kind of liberal thought processes and these like big political movements that aren't completely formed yet when they start doing stuff, or that never get formed enough to actually do anything, and all this kind of stuff. So there was a lot of it's definitely, and this is what they talk about in their autobiographies, because I feel like they didn't think about it as much going into it. Like they spent it's pretty interesting actually hearing about how they wrote it. They all went on vacation at the behest of John Cleese to, I don't remember where, but some like really nice
the Caribbean.
The Caribbean, yeah. And they spent 2 weeks and just kind of all hung out, kind of relaxed, and wrote down ideas and kind of formulated the script together. And then it feels like afterwards, when they were getting all this backlash, they were like, oh yeah, what is this movie about? And they had to really start thinking through the themes of it. But it's about authority on a lot of different levels. And I think it's interesting, even just starting with the scene of Jesus giving the Sermon on the Mount, and then all the spectators who are too far back to actually hear what he's saying are kind of start bickering with themselves in a way that is completely opposite to what is actually being taught in the Sermon on the Mount. And I think that kind of carries throughout the whole thing, like this idea of when we get so engrossed in things that we actually start doing the opposite of the helpful things that are being taught to us and that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah. And John Cleese talks about in his autobiography that I think his drive, at least his concept of the movie, and it's interesting because the three autobiographies that I found and listened to, because I have time for audiobooks and that's pretty much it.
Plug them, Alex.
John Cleese's memoir. So anyway, Eric Idle's Bright Side of Life. Always look on the bright side. Something like that. And then Michael Palin's Diaries from
that's the only one that I got
1969 to 1979, the Monty Python years. He has 2 other diary books, and of course after he kind of retired from sketch comedy, he essentially became like a travel writer, and he just travels a lot and writes books about traveling and so on and so forth. So he has other writing out there that's kind of autobiographical, but if you're looking for the Python stuff, you're looking for Diaries 1969 to 1979.
Which goes through Life of Brian. It's before Meaning of Life.
Yeah, that happened in 1983. But they all have like different takes on what the Life of Brian was really about. And John Cleese's specifically was he didn't think the movie was trying to poke fun at religion. It was trying to poke fun at followers of religion who take it way too far. Which if you're looking for those scenes in the movie, there definitely are those scenes, and they're hilarious. The sandal scene is obviously a great example. The one where there's like a forum of messiahs that are all preaching stuff, and people are like going around checking their ideas against the messiahs is hilarious.
Brian wakes up and opens the window.
Yeah. And of course, obviously they were playing with larger ideas here, but I don't think their goal was to make any sort of big cultural statement. I think they were making they were making a funny story, and they were dealing with stuff and poking fun at it to kind of put it in perspective and to be able to laugh at it. But I don't think they were trying to use a bad turn of phrase, nail religion to the cross. But obviously, that doesn't mean there wasn't a lot of kickback when this movie came out, because there was a lot of kickback from lots of people about it, which is interesting to go from something that was so popular as Grail to a bold move in the Life of Brian, which was still very, very popular and still is to this day, but was a controversial, rather a ballsy move by the Pythons from a PR standpoint.
And kind of getting into more like structure and technical stuff. So this film is coming in like a long line of biblical epic type films, and I think specifically like it starts off with the wise man scene that reminisces of the intro to Ben-Hur, when the wise men come to the stable and stuff like that, but they obviously play a gag off of that, and even their like poster graphic looks a lot like the Ben-Hur title, and stuff like that. There's a lot of that kind of stuff built in here, and again into the structure. Like, since we're following this one guy, Brian, we're able to go like add sketches like throughout everything that's happening, but also it feels even more cohesive a little bit than the Holy Grail, because we're following one guy. So as you mentioned in your notes, Alex, there's a point where Brian is being chased by all of these people who have mistakenly decided that he is the Messiah, and we're able to go through like 6 different separate bits all in this one chase scene, just because he keeps getting stalked by this guy who wants to like haggle with him over some merchandise, and then he gets stopped by this ex-leper who wants him to, or I guess that was actually a different part of the movie, but he gets stopped by something else, and then he gets abducted by aliens, and then he meets this crazy guy who's had a vow of silence for like 18 years, and just like there's all this stuff, but it's all within one scene. So you've still got those sketches that Monty Python is so good at doing, but giving it a location and one character to focus around makes it all come together really well.
Yeah, no, this is definitely, I think the story in this one is probably slightly more cohesive than than Holy Grail. And I think certainly that the ending in this one makes more sense from a narrative standpoint than the ending of Holy Grail.
Right.
In terms of just telling a story.
This one doesn't like just end. It actually has like a somewhat climactic moment.
Yeah.
Maybe anticlimactic, but still.
Yeah, and it actually ends on like a kind of a message and all.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to the middle of the podcast.
If I had thought about this a little bit more ahead of time, I would have made some kind of like plan for disrupting the structure of our show, but
it feels like too much work, man.
Can't come up with
I'm gonna shove this cracker in my mouth.
Head.
It all wraps it up in a way that doesn't get wrapped up in Holy Grail. The ending of Holy Grail still kind of feels like a Flying Circus episode, but the ending of Life of Brian feels like a movie.
This one definitely feels more like a movie and less like an extended Monty Python skit.
Yeah. And this is definitely this is one where they had a larger budget. They didn't have the biggest budget in the world, but they did have a larger budget based on the success of the first film. Of course, they did have a studio deal at first to make this movie until they submitted the idea and the script. And then the studio was like, "Are you crazy? We're
Nope.
We're not going to have our studio associated with something that's being irreverent about religion."
And they're like, "Did you hear that? All of our funders and people giving us money."
Yeah.
Because they've got to make political moves, with every movie that they accept.
Yeah, and of course this. But this movie gets funded by Eric Idle's good friend, George Harrison of Beatles fame, if you don't know who George Harrison is. Also a member of like the 60s countercultural movement. Big fan of Monty Python. In fact, George Harrison would appear with them in some of their live shows that they performed. Like he would be a lumberjack in the Lumberjack song. Yeah.
Didn't he have he had a cameo in Life of Brian too?
I don't know if George Harrison had a cameo in Life of Brian. He might have.
I want to say he did as I can't even remember. It was one of their ridiculous Roman names. He was one of the Roman senators or something.
He was definitely in the Ruggles, which All You Need Is Cash. The Ruggles, All You Need Is Cash, which is a movie that George Harrison hired Eric Idle to make, which is a parody of the Beatles, which is quite funny hilarious in a lot of ways. But a lot of people don't recognize George Harrison when he's not playing music. So he kind of like glides through all of these cameo roles without being noticed, which is quite amusing and entertaining. But another famous person who's in this movie is, of course, Spike Milligan, who appears in the sandal scene. I think he's the guy who is holding up the sandal while everybody runs away. He happened to be in Tunisia while the Pythons were shooting, and he ran into them one day and they were like, "Hey, do you want to be in the scene?" He said yes. He came out for the first part of the day, shot the wide, and then was like, "Hey, it's hot. I'm on vacation. I don't want to be here," and left and didn't shoot any of his close-ups. So they kind of had to work with that.
Oh, wow.
But if you don't know who Spike Milligan is, Spike Milligan was, along with Peter Sellers and another guy whose name I don't quite remember, I'm sorry, a member of The Goon Show, which was a show on British radio. It was a comedic show that came on the weekends, which is a very popular time for comedy shows on British radio during the 40s and 50s. And it was, all of the Pythons, with the exception of Terry Gilliam, because he was in America as a kid, listened to The Goon Show as kids and really loved it. It had a big impact on kind of their on their style and what they found as comedy. Oftentimes those jokes you hear as a kid are what determine your sense of humor pretty much the rest of your life. So the Goon Show, all of their members were definitely idols to all of the Pythons, and to get the chance to put one of them in their movie was, of course, amazing. Before the Python show really became a thing, Cleese and Chapman would end up working with Peter Sellers across a few different projects. But they were kind of all tied together in a way. And of course, Peter Sellers was on our Pink Panther show episode, which we talked about a couple months ago. And if you're looking for a clip of the Goon Show, there's currently clips on both our Facebook and our Twitter if you'd like to go listen to some of their comedy.
Yeah. And you just mentioned kind of just a second ago about George Harrison kind of gliding through cameo appearances. And I guess that's something that we definitely got to talk about that we didn't mention with the last film is all the roles that each of the Pythons play in these movies. And the way that they're able to just kind of like morph and sometimes play multiple characters within the same scene. And how they, obviously like the characters playing women and this one being Brian's mom and stuff like that, and how they have to like choose, who's going to be the woman in this one. Okay, well, Michael Palin's women are a little bit more easy to believe than John Cleese's women because he's such a huge guy that it's hard to sometimes pull that off. And actually, John Cleese was originally wanted to be Brian in this film, and they decided that Graham Chapman was a better fit as kind of the straight guy. Like we said, being King Arthur, he played off really well in the Holy Grail. But Chapman, as we'll talk about a little bit, and overall was a bit of a handful. And I think around this time, he was still struggling with his alcoholism, and they weren't sure if he was going to be able to pull it together to pull off the film. But eventually he did, and he was able to get through it and get it all filmed. But it's interesting, like, just thinking about the different roles that each of the Pythons can fill, because they all, have the same comedic sense and stuff like that, but they all feel like they have different roles within the group, like we talked about at the top of the film. So here, John Cleese fills, several different roles, but it would have been a very different film if John Cleese had been Brian rather than Graham Chapman, who's able to look very kind of pathetic and just weak and confused a lot of the time, which is definitely his character, that John Cleese, doesn't usually do those kinds of roles within the sketches.
Yeah, they played... I love that this is the movie with a crushingly authoritarian government, and obviously that means John Cleese plays like 1,000 roles in this movie. Yeah. I mean, I think there's like one or two scenes where they almost have John Cleese playing against John Cleese in the same scene. And they just like swerve to make it not happen, but it comes very close many times.
And then kind of like as a flip on that with the Roman authority, you have Michael Palin playing Pontius Pilate, and he's got this lisp where he can't say his R's. And so he'll say, "So, Brian, are you?" And he's like, "Are you a woman?" And they just go off of this whole thing. And then his cousin, who has a lisp on different letters, and then eventually all the people are just trying to get them to say all these words that they can't say. Just like, again, poking fun at this authority and this huge like world authority in the Roman Empire.
What's his cousin's name, Jonathan?
Is it... Yeah, they have this. That bit is actually hilarious. The bit where he's talking about his cousin, whose name is Biggest Dickus, and literally like in the guy's face, like saying it over and over and over again. And you can tell that scene is the most genuine. I think I've seen them in all three of these films, is like genuinely trying not to laugh for so long. And I remember playing theater games like that, where you have to keep a straight face for as long as you possibly can. And even Michael Palin is trying not to laugh during that whole entire scene.
Yeah. They, I believe in American comedians tend to call it breaking. The Pythons referred to it as corpsing, which is laughing and breaking character in a scene, which I found very interesting because I never heard that word before. But that whole entire skit is based around their habits of corpsing. Apparently, John Cleese was the worst of the lot when it came to it. At least that's what some of them asserted in their books. And they were like, what if we made that a scene in this movie? And they did, and it was great. Because again, that scene in and of itself is kind of like a meta commentary on comedy and performing commentary, or performing comedy. I think unintentionally, nobody sets out to make a scene that funny with the concept in the head let's make a commentary about comedy performance.
Right.
They just go with the idea, and that's what it ends up being. But yes, it's pretty funny.
But on that note, this is the least meta of the films. Were there any fourth wall breaks in this film? The one like structure fourth wall break was when he gets abducted by aliens. But that still wasn't a direct fourth wall break. That was just a self-awareness bit.
I don't think there is. I don't think there are any fourth wall breaks in this movie.
Unless it was like a glance or something, but it was definitely not as blatant as Holy Grail, and definitely not as much as Meaning of Life, which we're about to get to.
Yeah, which talks directly to the audience for most of the movie.
Yeah.
So no, I don't think there are any fourth wall breaks in this.
Yeah, so I guess that's probably one of the other things that makes this feel the most like a cinematic experience out of all of their films.
Yeah, it's interesting. It kind of sticks out in a way compared to the other two. Although the next one also sticks out in a way compared to the other two. Which,
but in a very different sense.
Yeah, but I guess we should probably move on to that now. The Meaning of Life from 1983. Jason, what is The Meaning of Life?
Monty Python's The Meaning of Life from 1983 is a film built around sketches, more or less connected, much like an episode of Monty Python's The Flying Circus. And since it's incredibly difficult to tease a collection of sketches, here are some of said silly sketches. A business office in London sets sail to New York, where it pirates the businesses and the shining skyscrapers of Manhattan. A woman gives birth. Every sperm is sacred, a Catholic musical number. Sexual education class with live demonstration. Party time in the trenches of World War I. A group of soldiers with something better to do. Upending a tiger hunt. An audience attempts to find the fish. Real luxury medieval torture. Live organ transplants. A song in regards to the significance of insignificance. Discussing philosophy over a wafer-thin mint. A man being chased off the cliffs of Dover by topless women in sports gear. The Reaper comes to dinner. Christmas with Tony Bennett. It should also be noted that these sketches are connected by the theme of life and the meaning thereof. Thank you, and good night.
All right, Alex, I got to say that if you start a film off with a bunch of old accountants becoming pirates and attacking big corporations, you've kind of won my heart. That was definitely my favorite bit of this whole thing, which was a huge chunk of the film. That first scene.
Yeah, it was like 20 or 30 minutes or something like that.
And it's interesting that they also do a Ben-Hur joke where they kind of do this superimposing of the guy hitting the drums and the accountants are rowing the boat. So they start this film off with a Ben-Hur gag, and then this building just like sails off into this weird like abstract thing. Apparently this whole sequence was supposed to be animated by Terry Gilliam, and he eventually convinced them. He was like, let me just shoot it and direct it and we'll see how it goes. And it worked. Like on paper I would be like, there's no way you can make this happen, but somehow Terry Gilliam makes this thing work.
Yeah, this is definitely a preview of Terry Gilliam's Imagination trilogy and probably his whole filmography. It's got a very Time Bandits-y feel to it, very Baron Munchausen-y feel to it. Kind of a Brazil feel to it too, because it's so modern. But yeah, it wasn't intentionally meant to be so long. It was meant to be much shorter. But Terry Gilliam just kind of kept going and kept making more of it. Mm-hmm. And you can kind of tell when you're watching it, there's like breaks, like where it could have ended, and then it keeps going. Like after the ship launches from the British city, it could have ended, but it didn't.
Right.
It sailed like all the way to what I'm assuming is America, to New York.
Yeah, I saw it as New York.
But it kind of like it sails off into the sunset and then it keeps going. It feels like that was the point to me. It could be
But
wrong.
the best part is that it comes back.
Yeah. So originally, right, this segment was supposed to be much shorter. It was supposed to be part of the film set in like the mid to late portion of the film, obviously, because they're structuring it around kind of the sequence of events that happens in somebody's life, baby being born.
Well, yeah, not some like
Youth,
just general life. It's not like a person that we're following.
Yeah. Youth, middle age, and then old age.
The autumn years, yeah.
Yeah. So this probably would have gone towards the tail end of that, maybe like in middle age. But it got too big to really work in that section of the film. So what they decided to do instead was to put it at the front and then use the raid that happens at the end of the Crimson accounting sequence to tie it in later in on the film, which is quite interesting.
Yeah. And again, it's another great example of setup and payoff in a film that you expect to be very kind of self-contained in each particular section. Because in this film especially, broken up into like 4 or 5 different sections, you expect those sections to stay within their section. But that's not how Monty Python works. Even the rules that they set for themselves, they don't hold to.
Yeah.
And they like... Once the Crimson Tide or whatever comes in and attacks, they have a title that says, "We apologize for this attack by our short feature from the beginning of the film into our larger film," and just like this one is the most self-aware for sure.
Yeah, this one has a very odd structure to it. Like if you were to write it down on paper and look at the space that different parts of it take up and see if it makes sense. I would be willing to bet that movie would not make sense. And yet it kind of holds water when you watch it all put together.
Okay, Alex, the film that I thought of while watching this film that in my research I haven't seen any correlation between these, but I have to imagine there is some. The Phantom of Liberty. You saw the Louis Buñuel film Phantom of Liberty, right?
Yeah.
Where it's almost what I would call like opposite day, where Louis Buñuel like comes up with these situations and then flips them on their head. So in one scene, everyone is sitting on the toilet together, and then the little girl has to get up to go eat, and she has to go into this little room by herself to eat dinner. And they're like, "Don't talk about eating while we're sitting on the toilet." And just kind of this whole reversal of manners and stuff like that. And that's kind of what this film felt like, because that film is strung together by this very loose correlation of events, and it kind of jumps around between characters and stuff like that. And that's kind of the same thing here. And then occasionally they'll just like throw the fish back in and they'll say, "Hey, have we said anything about the meaning of life yet?" And they're like, "Oh, no, we haven't." But other than that, it's like everything kind of comes together, but it's like really loose correlations.
I think they were. I think one of the Pythons makes mention of Buñuel in one of their books, but the direct mention that I remember is Cleese comparing them to Buñuel, or saying they have been compared to him, and saying that they didn't have any idea what that comparison was about.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Python,
that's interesting because it's
Python
so surreal. This film is surreal.
Yeah, no, Python wasn't. So again, like Python isn't coming to this from like a highly intellectual viewpoint of making some big point, or like trying to use like surrealism as a thing. They were just making the stuff they thought was funny, and poking fun at stuff that they thought needed to be poked fun at.
The story in Palin's autobiography was that he kind of mentions it at the end of this one, because obviously the autobiography ends before Meaning of Life. But after Life of Brian comes out and they got all this lashback, they were like, "All right, we're gonna make another film. We're gonna show them how ridiculous a film can be." They thought Life of Brian was ridiculous and irreverent and stuff. Well, we will show them. And so I feel like Meaning of Life is Monty Python turned up to 11 in every one of the sketches in this film.
Yeah, no, it is pretty crazy. I also feel like the structure of this one might be the weakest of the three. And I kind of agree with what Eric Idle talks about in his book in regards. Wow, we're referencing the books a lot today, but we kind of have to because that's
have links to them on our blog.
Straight from the source, guys. He came back later and was like, they should have worked on the idea for this movie a little longer. They should have connected it through like the 7 stages of man is what Eric Idle called it, where they actually had one character who they trace from life to death, and they could probably do all of the same skits, but just connecting it through one person's experience probably would have made it a little more coherent. Because I do feel like sometimes this movie moves and starts and stops. There's some very clever bits where they like come back to the fish like you were talking about, or they go to, this is now the middle of the film, and there's just a woman sitting at the set part and saying like, this is now the middle of the film, and now for the Find the Fish song, which is maybe the weirdest part of the whole movie. The Find the Fish song is
definitely the most surreal.
Weird as hell. I don't understand what's going on in that sequence.
And also, as far as I know, there was no fish in that scene.
I don't think there was, and I think that was the point. There was no fish. But yeah, they kind of break the flow by going to something like that, even if they segue in between it, and then they go back to connect kind of like the series of connected skits, and then they come back again, or they go back and forth or something like that. It's interesting, that sort of connection, and certainly a lot of the skits are quite funny, but I don't feel like it flows as well as the previous 2 films.
Yeah, it's much more sketchy, like the Flying Circus kind of deal.
Yeah. Which is almost a little frustrating because it feels like they're kind of scratching at a bigger idea, but they're not quite. So
yeah, and I think that the other thing is like this film kind of guides you through itself in like the fact that it's so meta and so self-aware that it'll literally like start and be like, all right, this is where we're going. Starts with the fish kind of telling us what's going to happen, and then we have the lady sitting there. She comes up like several times, and then we have welcome to the middle of the film, and then it keeps like guiding you through it, but in a structured way. I guess there wasn't a lot of like characters looking at the camera like in a Ferris Buellery way, but it was more of just the film telling you what's happening, and then just the most insane, ridiculous things like Eric Idle coming out of the refrigerator and guiding the woman through the universe or whatever, which I feel like that sequence, the whole Repo Men sequence, and probably other parts of this are probably the source of a lot of modern like YouTube comedy, like the really dark YouTube comedy, like Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared. I feel like has a lot of those kinds of things to it, and the fact that it's so dark but played so straight and ridiculous. Like, oh yeah, of course we're walking through the universe while we're taking the liver out of a live human being or whatever, like stuff like that. Again, it's just like the way that Monty Python has kind of infused itself into the culture of both England and America, and I feel like it just keeps popping up in like these really weird ways.
Yeah, no, I could see that, and I mean, there's no doubt that Monty Python has a very, very long-reaching influence on many comedians. And definitely current comedians who are growing up now and have seen Monty Python. And even if they haven't seen Monty Python, like we've talked about before with the chain or waterfall of connections that happen, Monty Python was so influential at their time. They influenced something that is going to influence them. I mean, even, one of our favorite internet comedy people, Rhett and Link from Mythical, are pretty famous if you watch their series Buddy System. It takes a lot of weird left turns to completely bonkers places that's very reminiscent of Monty Python in a lot of ways. So yeah, they have a very long-reaching effect, and it's not to say that they own any of these techniques, obviously, or that every time that these techniques are used, that it must be a reference to Monty Python. It's just to say that they kind of helped popularize these techniques and kind of made them reach farther out into the comedic community.
Yeah, yeah. It's actually really hard to like talk about this film in any kind of specificity, just because it is so like disjointed and all over the place.
You know what? We can say it's the most musical of the films.
It is. I think all the films have music in them, but this one is like practically a musical.
Yeah, no, I would, you know what? If somebody made me decide whether or not it was a musical, I would say yes. I would say yes.
I would definitely say yes. It's just an insane, nonsensical musical. But it is a musical nonetheless. And I think like they've done several albums, and I wasn't sure if those albums are like ridiculous songs or if they're just like recorded they're vocal bits.
They're comedy albums. They're mostly people doing comedy sketches. Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, I think that this film, if it doesn't, could have a just album of all the songs that are in here.
Oh yeah, no, that is the thing. There is a Meaning of Life album for sure. I came across it while doing research for this film repeatedly, and I think it has some added score to it, which didn't help me when I was trying to figure out the number of songs in this film. Because I meant the musical production numbers, like Every Sperm is Sacred or the Universe song. Or I don't know. Did the Find a Fish scene have a song? I don't think it had a song.
No, it was just no. I want to erase that scene.
It's just weird.
My mind.
Oh, that was a very odd scene.
But yeah. Oh, one last tidbit. Did you see the Douglas Adams factoid, Alex?
I did not.
About this movie?
I did not.
Okay. So in the intro title sequence, the slab of stone comes down with the meaning of liff written on it, Liff, and then a lightning bolt writes an extra line under the second F and turning it into an E, so it's the meaning of life. Apparently, again, one of Eric Idle's friends, Douglas Adams, who's the famous author of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, was writing a book called The Meaning of Liff around the same time, being kind of a parody on the phrase meaning of life. And they were a little concerned about the similarity in title, but since they were such good friends, they decided to just kind of like give him a little nod in their title sequence in the film.
Well, that's a nice way to resolve it.
Yeah, it's pretty fun.
This is also actually the only Monty Python movie to be made with backing from a Hollywood studio, from an American studio. This one is signed with Universal. And again, if you think about the controversy that happened with Brian and the fact that the studio pulled funding after they found out what the movie was going to be about, you think the meaning of life might also be a dangerous topic. But it turns out that Universal didn't really care. And they told Python as such after they signed them. And they essentially gave them carte blanche to do whatever.
And they took it.
They took it for sure. But they did it because all of the American comedians who at the time, like think about like the SNL comedians who would start making their own movies around this time. And by the way, everybody from SNL at that time was a huge fan of Monty Python. They had them on the show. They had him host the show like 8 times within the first couple of years. At least between Palin and Idol, I don't know who else has. I feel like Cleese might have done it at some point. But after Universal signed Monty Python, all of the American comedians signed with Universal because they wanted to be at the same studio that Monty Python was at. Wow. So Universal had a feeling that would happen, and so they did it, gave Monty Python carte blanche to do whatever, and yeah, it paid off. And then I love when they told Monty Python as such, they were like, yeah, we'll let you do whatever, man. You got us all of the comedians.
All right, so let's move on into overall notes and talk about each of these films. And we've already kind of talked about their structure and stuff like that. But throughout a lot of the history of the group, there was a lot of dissension of opinion, like we kind of alluded to at the beginning. And there were people who felt that some of the members were in it for different reasons. Like some people felt that some of the members were in it like as just to get money, so they don't have to have a job and they can kind of go around, they make enough money to kind of just live a relaxed life and stuff like that. And some people were in it like as a job to fill their time and to just do it because this is what they want to do. And so whenever you have a group that feels like some people aren't as invested as other people, then you get a little bit of tension. And a lot of times, like John Cleese would feel like he had to go away and do other things that were unrelated to Monty Python and a couple of the other Pythons as well. Especially just from listening to Michael Palin's autobiography, or his diaries rather. It felt like he was one, and Terry Gilliam was one of the ones that were constantly trying to bring all of them together. And there were several times when it was kind of like this threat of the group breaking up and disintegrating. But they held together for quite a long time, up until The Meaning of Life, and then a couple years later with the death of Chapman. But through all those things, it was also interesting to listen to Palin talk about how even when they would have those dissensions, and then stuff would come out in the papers of one of them saying bad things, maybe exaggerated by the papers about the others, and then they would call each other up and they would talk about it, and then their relationship would be even stronger than it was before because they were very open about those things, even when they were disagreeing. And anytime that there was a question about something and, like Michael Palin or someone hadn't seen them in a long time, they would just ring them up and they would go over there and talk about it. And so it seems like even though they were all coming from kind of different perspectives and sometimes those clashed, they had fairly good conflict resolution, and they were such good friends that they were able to overcome those and still be very creative every time that they joined back up together.
Yeah, and that's not to say that they never had problems, because they certainly did. Obviously, they didn't get along perfectly. They kind of broke down to different writing teams to work within themselves. Typically, Chapman and Cleese would work together. Palin and Jones would work together. Idle would come up with his own skits, and Gilliam would do animation. But they all had different writing styles. So while Graham and John Cleese were typically working at a very structured pace, going beat by beat by beat, Jones and Palin would be trying to pull out the craziest ideas and make them work together, and they would often disagree on what made a good sketch. But in that contention, in that argument, you had a bunch of different ideas and styles banging together and polishing a better a better product for the sake of all of that fighting. And oftentimes we've heard many a story about people who didn't get along necessarily making really good creative partnerships, just because they had different styles on it. And because they had different styles, they tend to curb the worst of the worst of the other's faults, while they still fought for their own strengths. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. It just so happens that whatever weird alchemy leads to these sorts of things, Monty Python had it in spades, and it worked really well. Oh, do you not know what a pepper pod is, Jonathan?
I don't.
Well, it is a term that they call the women, the women that they play in drag, which is actually a long-standing tradition in England, action coming from the traditional art of the panto, or pantomime, practiced by a lot of vaudeville artists. I mean, Charlie Chaplin did it.
It seems very vaudeville.
Yeah, I think Cary Grant did it when he was in the performing arts in England, so on and so forth. But it was pretty traditional to have like the lead male, like the male lead would be played by a woman and the female lead would be played by a man, just because, I don't know, English panto like to do those kinds of things, and it led to humor. I don't really know the origin of it. I doubt anybody does. Maybe they do. I need to do some more research on that. But anyway, Monty Python called their old women in drag pepper pots because they thought they looked like pepper pots, which is apparently a pot that pepper comes in England. I don't know because I've never experienced this particular appliance, but that's what they called them. And I think they make reference to them in all three of the books that we dived into for this episode.
Yeah, that's interesting. I did not know that. But yeah, the women that they play are so interesting and eccentric, and it's always funny because each one of them plays different. Like the women that each one of them play are so different. Again, kind of talking about. When they're kind of dividing those up. Like John Cleese's women are obviously very different from Eric Idle's or Michael Palin's women, just by virtue of his size and, his more commanding presence and all that kind of stuff. So anytime that they're in drag for one of their characters, it's always a trip.
Yeah. And it's kind of become like their type of drag, which is what they call pepper pot. Has kind of like become a signature of Monty Python, right? Like you think of Monty Python, you think of the animation, you think of the crazy left turns, you think of all of the skits that you remember. And one of the things that pops up is that they would always have these crazy, absurd, middle-aged women characters,
usually very shrill.
Very shrill, because I guess that's just the voice that they could do that they thought was funny, and that just became the characters. And of course, all of the characters are absurd because that's how the comedy functions. But yeah, it's just pepper pots are one of those signatures of Monty Python that I didn't think a lot of people would know the term of, and it would be fun to share. Here's another question for you, Jonathan.
All right.
Why is there a dungeon in every movie?
I don't know. I think they just like dungeons. I don't know.
No,
but, it makes sense thematically in the first two films. We're in medieval times, so we're going to have dungeons. That's like a thing. Also, same thing with biblical times. We're being, imprisoned, so we have a dungeon and the guy hanging there. But Meaning of Life, the dungeon literally comes out of nowhere. And they go in heaven, or, well, you don't actually know it's heaven at first, but
it's
they go
Christmas
to this like
in heaven, Jonathan.
Fancy restaurant thing. Yeah, oh my gosh. The film is so ridiculous. But at the beginning, the couple goes into this restaurant, which is Hawaiian dungeon theme or something ridiculous, or it was like dungeon luau. I don't know, but the restaurant is dungeon themed with like guys hanging on the wall being scourged, while all the waiters are like in this Hawaiian get up, and then they get cards of like having different conversations, and they just are so bad at having conversations about anything. It was hilarious. Do all philosophers have S in them? Does that make Shirley Temple a philosopher? It's just like the most ridiculous.
Jonathan, did you know that Dungeon Luau is the scent of Old Spice deodorant that I use?
Oh, I bet that would sell very well, actually.
It sounds popular. You see their minds kind of collectively go to the same places over and over the course of their skits, over the course of their films. They definitely like fantasy. They like historical. They like that kind of genre of storytelling. You don't see them go to like Western or sci-fi. There's like the one alien scene in Brian,
right,
and that's a Gilliam concept for sure. But you tend to see like this consistency of themes that they tend to parody and go after. So I would assume that if they had kept making movies or made a few more, they probably would have gone back to the same boat and explored like a different historical story or a different mythological tale of some sort. Just because that's their hat. That's what they like to do, which is great because I tend to prefer those things over sci-fi and futuristic stories anyway. So it made me happy, but it was just kind of like a creative tendency that I noticed over the course of watching these movies.
Yeah. So I have a question for you, Alex.
Okay.
Do you think this is the most meta group that we have covered, or meta filmmaker in some sense or another? Because we've covered several.
We have, but I would put them up there. I would definitely put them up there, and maybe because they're trying to make commentary and comedy about things, but without any regard for they're not like deeply studied filmmakers in that sense. Like, even like,
but I'm thinking
Boonwell eventually was referencing the art of cinema and became involved in the set, and if it would eventually become defined as a filmmaker. And so he would be making a meta commentary more about society than he would about filmmaking by the end of his career. Whereas I feel like Monty Python not intentionally entered this meta realm just by the sake of their brand of humor, and then just kept on amping up their humor and therefore became more and more meta.
Yeah, and I'm thinking specifically of filmmakers like Mel Brooks and Jim Henson, who will do those fourth wall breaks and like talk about the structure within their actual films and stuff, like with Blazing Saddles busting through the wall of the studio and having this brawl with another film in the middle of the movie, and stuff like that. But, like Meaning of Life, having the jungle chief come in and unzip his costume and say, "Welcome to the middle of the film," is just one of the most bizarrely meta things that I've ever seen.
Yeah, no, I think in an effort to be funny, they ended up unintentionally becoming incredibly meta.
Yeah, and then, of course, they know enough about film structure and stuff that, they can say, all right, what do normally films do? What are the rules of film, and how can we break them, and how can we slap those rules in the face, basically?
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't like they were setting out to be the most meta filmmakers ever. It was just that was a signpost on their goal of trying to be the funniest ever. So,
and it started in their show too, because they would do stuff like move the credits of their show around, like put it in the middle of the show, or right after the opening credits, they would play the closing credits and stuff like that. Just to play with the structure and play with stuff. So there's been a hallmark ever from the beginning of the group. But when it comes into the big screen, it's a lot of fun.
All right. So for those of you who are interested in watching more from these creative people, we have some recommendations for you. Yeah.
So these are the three films that the Monty Python made together as a group. But as we mentioned before, Terry Gilliam and Terry Jones both went on to become directors in their own right and would often use their Python collaborators in their films. So for Terry Gilliam, we have Time Bandits and the Baron of...
The Misadventures of Baron Munchausen. And then Brazil round out his Imagination trilogy. And
does Brazil include the Monty Python actors as well?
I don't know off the top of my head, but it definitely fits that bag. It's much darker. Because
Time Bandits and Baron do have many of the Monty Python actors in them. And then Terry Jones made The Wind in the Willows, also known as Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, I think, and also Jabberwocky, which included several of the Monty Python actors.
Who did you play in Mr. Toad in high school, Jonathan?
Mr. Toad.
Oh, well, there you go. We have Mr. Toad on the podcast today. Well, if you're going to keep looking at some of the other works, I mean, I have a couple recommendations as well. I would say A Fish Called Wanda is maybe John Cleese's best film outside of the Monty Python movies. It's definitely one of his favorite movies that he's made, and definitely worth.
Were there any other Pythons in that, or just John Cleese?
Possibly. I don't remember. I really don't.
Okay.
And then of course there is the Ruggles. All You Need Is Cash from Eric Idle, which I watched in preparation for this episode. It's also really good. It does have other Pythons in it. I can't remember. I think Michael Palin, who plays like the reporter or is answering it. Michael Palin answers questions to the reporter, who is played by George Harrison, outside of the Ruggles Banana Corporation, which is currently going bankrupt.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's that's crazy.
You know, it goes to some weird places. It's a fun watch, and it's pretty quick too. I highly recommend it. But yeah, no, that I think there, and of course all these guys had careers beyond just the movies we've mentioned so far and the Pythons itself. And of course, all of Flying Circus is on Netflix currently. And if you're interested in seeing more of their skits, they are there. And more and more for you guys to enjoy, should you wish to go down the Monty Python rabbit hole like we have been for the past few weeks. But we're not going to be talking about Monty Python or really even comedy next week. We're going to be talking about something
not even close.
Totally different. In fact, we're going to be kicking off a brand new series that'll be ongoing at least for this year, hopefully a little bit
interspersed
beyond
throughout this season.
Yeah, or maybe just a more incorporated part of the series of some filmmakers that we have been neglecting to mention here on the podcast. All of the wonderful female filmmakers throughout history. And I just learned today, Jonathan, that Agnes Varda passed away.
Oh no, really?
Yeah, it was either today or yesterday. It was very, very recent. She was like 90 something years old. Brilliant, epic filmmaker from the French New Wave and beyond. We've already covered one of her films, Cleo from 5 to 7, on a podcast a couple years ago. And we are thinking, well, we're probably almost certainly going to do an episode on her now, later this year. But
definitely.
We're going to kick off our Film du Femme. That just sounded cool to us. If you know French and you want to school us on our French, feel free to reach out and do that.
We'll grammarize it by the time the episode comes out.
our Film du Femme series, in which we highlight many of the wonderful female filmmakers throughout film history and still working today, who have lots to offer and lots to be learned from aspiring filmmakers like us. Starting off with Sophia Coppola, because we just covered not only her dad in The Godfather, but her herself as an actor in the third movie. Right. And she transitioned into directing a little bit after that, kicked off her career with The Virgin Suicides from 1999, which we'll be covering, as well as Lost in Translation from 2003 featuring Bill Murray. And then The Beguiled from 2017, her most recent film. I've watched through most of her canon in preparation for this episode so far, Jonathan, and I'm pretty excited. I very, very much like her style. It's very moody and atmospheric, and her color palette is pretty similar to one Wes Anderson. So and plus there's like a sad Bill Murray movie in there too. Like, yeah. I'm pumped, man. This is going to be a good one for me, at least. And of course, we'll be featuring other female filmmakers all throughout the year, of course, and just incorporating them into the podcast in general.
Lots of different styles.
So look forward to that and learning about movies that you might know, but might not know the story behind, or movies that you might never heard of, but are really good and deserve your attention as a film lover. Anything to plug this week, Jonathan, for our donations podcast?
Yeah, so again, we have a Patreon and a Ko-fi account. If you would like to support the show, help us with overhead and movie rentals and stuff like that. And so update for patrons. The next Patreon podcast that will be coming out a week from today is going to be covering a film from 100 years ago, J'accuse, French film by Abel Gance. Quite an epic silent film, actually. And
that's really long.
Yeah, it is very long. And then we will probably be ramping up our Patreon commentary soon, so stay tuned for information about that.
Well, that's about all the time we have for this episode.
If you have movie suggestions for us or just want to reach out, I can be found on Twitter at @JSSatchel.
And I'm at Alex Garinger.
And I'm at the Blue Jay, 1994.
And to find links to things that we talked about today, you can view them on the blog at thefilmlings.com.
If you like the show, let us know. Leave us a review on iTunes so other people know what we're all about.
We definitely appreciate it.
Talk to you next time.
All right, see ya.
And eventually, at the mercy of Pontius Pilate and Bigus Dickus, he is pushed. I've never heard of this. As Brian finds himself in increasingly hopeless situations, and eventually at the mercy of Pontius Pilate and Bigus Dickus. Damn it. Come on. As Brian As Brian finds himself in increasingly hopeless situations. Come on.